On April 8, 1943, the skies over occupied France witnessed the debut of an aircraft that would soon redefine air combat in Europe. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, unlike the sleek, lithe Messerschmitt Bf-109s or the agile Focke-Wulf FW-190s that German pilots were accustomed to dominating, the Thunderbolt appeared almost comically oversized. Its broad fuselage, massive radial engine, and wide, bubble canopy gave it the awkward appearance of a flying milk bottle, a nickname coined that very day by none other than Oberleutnant Rolf Hermikon of Jagdisch 26. The sight of this lumbering giant descending from the clouds elicited laughter among the Luftwaffe ranks. For them, it seemed less a fighter and more an ungainly cargo plane, ill-suited for the delicate dance of dogfighting they had perfected over the past years. Hermikon and his squadron were not alone in their derision. Reports from the Luftwaffe intelligence offices at the time underestimated the Thunderbolt's potential. Its size, weight, and unconventional silhouette made it an easy target for ridicule. It won't turn, it won't climb, and it certainly won't survive a burst of cannon fire. The German pilots joked they could not have been more wrong. The Thunderbolt's design philosophy, conceived by Alexander Kartveli and his team at Republic Aviation, was deliberately contrarian to contemporary European thinking, where German aircraft emphasized agility and tight turning capabilities. The P-47 prioritized durability, raw horsepower, and sheer firepower. Kartveli envisioned a plane that could dive at blistering speeds, withstand enormous punishment, and unleash a storm of bullets that would tear through enemy aircraft. In essence, it was a flying tank with wings, a machine built to survive, strike, and return. At the heart of this behemoth was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, a 2,000 horsepower radial powerhouse. Coupled with a sophisticated turbosoup, the engine allowed the P-47 to operate at altitudes up to 27,000 feet, without losing significant power level where German fighters began to struggle, their engines sputtering as thin air robbed them of performance. This altitude advantage would soon become a crucial tactical edge, allowing Thunderbolt pilots to choose the terms of engagement, dive from above with lethal speed, and disengage when necessary. Yet, the most intimidating aspect of the Thunderbolt was its armament. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns lined its wings, carrying a combined total of 3,400 rounds of ammunition. The combined rate of 6,000 rounds per minute was enough to shred an unsuspecting Messerschmitt into pieces before the pilot had time to react. Unlike the precise but limited German 20mm cannon, the P-47's 8 guns provided a deadly hailstorm, capable of saturating a target and leaving virtually no room for escape. This heavy firepower, combined with the aircraft's rugged airframe, made the Thunderbolt a terrifying adversary once its potential was understood. Despite these features, initial encounters were far from spectacular, at least from the Luftwaffe's perspective. On that first sortie, German pilots attempted to outmaneuver the Thunderbolts in classic dogfight style, but the P-47 pilots, trained to exploit their aircraft's strengths rather than its perceived weaknesses, held their course in altitude. The Germans found that while they could turn inside the Thunderbolt, closing in for the kill often meant diving into a hail of .50 caliber bullets at an alarming rate. Their laughter began to fade as first casualties emerged. Meanwhile, in the cockpits of the Thunderbolts, American pilots were learning quickly. They had to adapt to the aircraft's massive size and weight, clumsy in tight turns and sluggish in low-speed maneuvers. The P-47 required a different kind of thinking. Pilots learned to use energy tactics, retaining altitude and speed to strike with devastating precision before climbing back out of reach. It was a harsh learning curve, but the payoff was immediate. Aircraft that were considered laughably unwieldy in the morning were proving to be nearly indestructible by afternoon. That first day over France was a harbinger of the Thunderbolt's future reputation. The German pilots' early mockery, rooted in appearances and preconceptions, set the stage for a dramatic reversal of fortune. What had seemed like a clumsy, oversized fighter would soon become a symbol of American industrial might and strategic ingenuity. It was a plane that could take punishment, dish out devastating firepower, and return home, a combination that would rewrite the rules of aerial combat over Europe. The P-47 Thunderbolt's debut was not just a battle of aircraft. It was a confrontation of philosophies. The Germans had relied on finesse, precision, and tactical cunning. The Americans brought overwhelming force, resilience, and firepower. That first laugh from Oberleutnant and her squadron would echo in history as the beginning of an unexpected humiliation for the Luftwaffe day, when ridicule turned to terror in the skies over France. By the end of April 1943, the flying milk bottle had begun to prove that appearances could be deceiving. Beneath its bulky exterior lay a fighter capable of shrugging off punishment, diving at speeds the Germans could scarcely match, and unleashing a torrent of bullets that no aircraft in the Luftwaffe's inventory could withstand with impunity. The age of the Thunderbolt had begun, and for those who had laughed at it first, there would soon be no reason to smile. The arrival of the P-47, Thunderbolt in European skies was met with laughter from German pilots. But as May 1943 rolled in, the first real combat encounters began to reveal the challenges faced by American pilots. The Thunderbolt, impressive on paper with its massive engine, 8.50 caliber machine guns, and nearly indestructible airframe, was not the perfect fighter the pilots had hoped for. In the early missions, the P-47 struggled to match the agility of the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190. Too many, it seemed less like a fighter and more like a flying truck, lumbering through the sky while the smaller, nimble German fighters weaved effortlessly around it. This perceived disadvantage forced American pilots to quickly adapt their tactics. The traditional dogfighting maneuvers, tight turns, rolls, and instant climbs were not the P-47's strength. Pilots who attempted to mimic the Luftwaffe style found themselves outpaced, outturned, and vulnerable to bursts of 20mm cannon fire. The Thunderbolt's size and weight, while contributing to its durability, made it slower to respond in sudden aerial skirmishes. On multiple occasions, new Thunderbolt pilots returned from missions bruised and frustrated, convinced that their plane's massive bulk was more of a liability than a weapon. Yet, what the German pilots did not realize, and what the American pilots were just beginning to appreciate, was the P-47's extraordinary survivability. Its rugged construction could absorb punishment that would destroy almost any other fighter in the sky. Even under concentrated fire from FW-190s and Bf-109s, Thunderbolts had a remarkable tendency to return home. The fuselage and wing design, reinforced with armor around critical components, allowed these planes to withstand hits from cannon shells, machine gun bursts, and even small caliber flak without catastrophic failure. One of the most vivid illustrations of the Thunderbolts' toughness came on June 26, 1943, through the exploits of 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson. On a routine escort mission over occupied France, Johnson's P-47 was engaged by multiple Luftwaffe fighters. During the battle, his aircraft was struck by a 20mm cannon shell that caused extensive damage to the fuselage, ripped open the left wing, and disabled several control surfaces. In addition, dozens of machine gun rounds peppered the plane, leaving it riddled with holes like a sieve. Yet Johnson, demonstrating both skill and determination, managed to nurse his heavily damaged Thunderbolt back across the English Channel. Upon landing, ground crews counted over 200 punctures across the aircraft, some so severe that pieces of skin and metal were barely hanging together. Remarkably, the plane remained flyable, proof that the P-47 was, in the truest sense, a flying fortress. Such incidents began to sow confusion among the Luftwaffe ranks. Initial intelligence reports had categorized the P-47 as a fragile, unwieldy fighter and easy target for experienced German pilots. Observers believed that its large radial engine and massive wings would be liabilities in combat, making it slow, predictable, and easy to bring down. The reality, however, was far more daunting. Not only could the Thunderbolt absorb punishment, but it also carried enough firepower to annihilate any opponent that lingered too long in its sights. A single P-47 could unleash 8.50 caliber machine guns in a synchronized hailstorm of bullets, capable of decimating enemy aircraft in seconds. American pilots, slowly but surely, began to develop tactics that maximized these strengths. They realized that engaging in tight dogfights was suicidal, but climbing to higher altitudes, diving on unsuspecting opponents, and using the aircraft's superior speed in a dive allowed them to dictate the terms of engagement. The so-called flying truck could not outturn a Bf-109 in a horizontal skirmish, but it could strike from above with brutal efficiency and retreat before the enemy had a chance to react. Each successful mission reinforced the Thunderbolt's potential, and confidence among pilots began to grow, replacing the initial frustration with respect for the aircraft's remarkable resilience. Meanwhile, German pilots were left perplexed. They expected to exploit the Thunderbolt's apparent sluggishness, only to find that P-47s often emerged from engagements largely intact, their pilots unshaken and ready to counterattack. The very durability they had dismissed became a tactical nightmare, forcing them to reconsider their approach. What they had assumed would be a short, humiliating skirmish often turned into a drawn-out engagement in which German fighters, despite their maneuverability, could not secure easy kills. By the end of June 1943, the early battles over France had exposed the paradox of the P-47, slow in the turn but nearly invincible under fire, awkward in dogfights but lethal when it hit its mark. The initial ridicule of the flying milk bottle gradually gave way to grudging acknowledgement among both American pilots and enemy observers that the Thunderbolt was a force to be reckoned with. It was a lesson learned through frustration, trial, and repeated demonstrations of toughness. In combat, a lesson that would lay the foundation for the aircraft's later dominance in the European theater. The early struggles of the P-47 were not failures. They were the first steps in a steep learning curve that would transform the way American pilots approached air combat. While German pilots laughed at the Thunderbolt initially, the early combat missions of May and June 1943 quietly revealed a truth that would soon become terrifyingly clear. Appearances could deceive, but raw resilience, firepower, and the will to survive were assets no enemy could easily overcome. By the summer of 1943, the P-47 Thunderbolt had shed its image as a clumsy flying milk bottle. In the hands of American pilots, it was quickly evolving from an unwieldy brute into a formidable weapon. While its early battles were marked by frustration and difficulty in traditional dogfighting, the Thunderbolt's true potential was beginning to shine through, especially under the guidance of one man. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zen, an experienced and highly respected commander, understood that the Thunderbolt's strengths lay not in tight turns or nimble maneuvers, but in its raw power, durability, and speed. He taught his pilots a new tactic that would make use of the Thunderbolt's inherent qualities: boom and zoom. This strategy was simple in concept, but devastating in execution. Climb to a high altitude, dive on an unsuspecting enemy at high speed, fire a devastating barrage, and then zoom back up into the sky before the enemy could react. It was a method that maximized the P-47's strength sets speed in a dive, its unmatched firepower, and its ability to escape before being caught in a dogfight. For the first time, the P-47 was used not to engage in a swirling dogfight, but as a weapon of precise, calculated destruction. The Germans, skilled in the art of the turn-and-burn dogfight, were ill-prepared for this new threat. They were accustomed to pursuing slower, less formidable targets, not a fast-moving, heavily armed fighter that could strike hard and then disappear before they had time to respond. The Thunderbolt's superior altitude performance gave it the upper hand in these engagements, allowing American pilots to dictate the timing and conditions of the fight. One of the defining moments of this new strategy came on August 17, 1943, during the devastating raid on the German ball-bearing factories in a city that was strategically vital to the German war effort. The raid, which was carried out by American bombers under heavy Luftwaffe opposition, became one of the most famous encounters in the European air war. The P-47s, flying as bomber escorts, faced off against a massive wave of German fighters determined to stop the bombing run. The Thunderbolts, using the boom and zoom tactic, tore through the skies, diving from high altitudes to engage the German fighters below. The 8.50 caliber machine guns mounted on each P-47 poured a deadly stream of fire into the Luftwaffe planes. The accuracy and sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. The German fighters, often taken by surprise, would be ripped apart before they could react. The concept of the convergence zoned an area where all 8 machine guns' fire paths intersected was terrifyingly effective. Within 300 yards of this zone, enemy aircraft were disintegrated, not just shot down. A single P-47 could cut through a formation of German planes like a hot knife through butter. That day at Schweinfurt marked a turning point. The P-47 was no longer just a tool for defensive operations. It had become an instrument of destruction. The Thunderbolt's incredible firepower, combined with its ability to disengage at will, made it an almost uncatchable predator. By the end of the raid, the P-47 had established itself as the Luftwaffe's worst nightmare. In the words of one German pilot, "I don't mind the Mustangs, but the Thunderbolts. They're the ones you have to watch out for." The success of the Thunderbolt was further cemented with the introduction of the P-47D-22 model in late 1943. This variant featured a larger paddle blade propeller, which significantly improved the P-47's climb rate. The larger blades enabled the engine to deliver more power, translating to better high-speed and high-altitude performance, making it an even more formidable adversary. The Germans, who had already been slow to adapt to the P-47's first wave of dominance, were now confronted with an even faster, more agile Thunderbolt. As if the relentless firepower wasn't enough, the P-47's new climb rate made it more difficult than ever for the Luftwaffe to escape. The propeller's distinctive, thunderous sound became so synonymous with the P-47 that German pilots started calling it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap. The impact of this new P-47 variant was felt deeply on both the psychological and tactical levels. German pilots, already struggling with the tactics employed by the earlier versions of the Thunderbolt, were now demoralized by the combination of blistering speed, unrelenting firepower, and the persistent roar of the Thunderbolt as it tore through the skies. The flying milk bottle had become a predator, and the once proud Luftwaffe pilots, many of whom had laughed at the P-47's cumbersome design, were now confronted with a fighter that could outpace them, outgun them, and survive their best shots. The German High Command, blindsided by the P-47's durability and power, began to issue orders to their pilots on how to handle the new threat. But it was already too late. The P-47 had already entrenched itself as one of the dominant forces in the skies. The Luftwaffe pilots, once confident in their superiority, now found themselves on the defensive, constantly second-guessing their every move. The very aircraft they had dismissed as a joke had become a nightmare they could not shake. This psychological shift was profound. In the early days of the war, the Germans had enjoyed overwhelming air superiority, largely due to their superior tactics and faster, more maneuverable aircraft. But by late 1943, that confidence had begun to crack, as more P-47s joined the fray and more Luftwaffe pilots were shot down or forced to retreat. The morale of the German pilots began to erode. They now feared the P-47 not just because of its firepower, but because it represented a shift in the balance of air superiority. The once laughable Thunderbolt was now the embodiment of American strength and ingenuity, a force that the Germans could neither outrun nor outfight. The rise of the P-47 Thunderbolt, spearheaded by innovative tactics like boom and zoom and enhanced by technological upgrades, like the P-47D-22, marked a key shift in the air war over Europe. What had been a laughingstock in early 1943 had become a dominant force by early 1944. The German pilots' confidence had been shattered, and the skies over Europe were no longer their domain. As 1944 dawned, the P-47 Thunderbolt had fully earned its reputation, not just as a tough, hard-hitting fighter, but as an air superiority weapon in its own right. It was a testament to the power of adaptability, innovation, and sheer American resolve. And for the Luftwaffe, the worst was yet to come. By 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had fully cemented its reputation as a dominant force in the skies over Europe. The initial struggles and growing pains were a distant memory, as the aircraft had evolved into a powerhouse of American air superiority. However, its role had shifted dramatically over the course of the war. As the strategic needs of the Allies changed and new aircraft like the P-51 Mustang began to take over long-range escort duties, the P-47, once a flying milk bottle, was now a multi-role fighter bomber, and its contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany would be felt across both the skies and the battlefield. In early 1944, the primary task for the P-47 was long-range bomber escort. The B-17 Flying Fortress, along with other heavy bombers, had been making regular raids over German-occupied Europe. But as the bomber formations neared their targets in enemy territory, they were often met with fierce resistance from the Luft. The range of German fighters, like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-1090, made it difficult for Allied bombers to complete their missions without heavy losses. Enter the P-47. With the addition of external fuel tanks, the Thunderbolt was able to escort the B-17s deep into enemy territory, providing much-needed protection against the Luftwaffe. Though not as long-range as the P-51 Mustang, the P-47 was still able to provide effective defense for the bombers, especially in the mid to short-range engagements. It could dive down on attacking German fighters with devastating firepower and then retreat back to the bombers or disengage before becoming a target itself. The Thunderbolt's resilience and powerful armament made it a valuable companion to the B-17s, whose gunners could also help defend the bombers in tight situations. For much of 1944, the P-47 formed the backbone of bomber escorts, ensuring that the American and British heavy bombers could strike at the heart of Germany's industrial complex. However, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang in late 1943, with its greater range and improved performance, meant that the Thunderbolt's role as a long-range escort was no longer necessary. The P-51 quickly took over the bomber escort duties, and the P-47's focus shifted toward a different, but equally important mission: ground attack. Now, the Thunderbolt, armed with powerful bombs and rockets, would transform into a Jaboa fighter bomber that could strike at the heart of German defenses with lethal precision. The P-47's multi-role versatility made it a perfect platform for this new mission. The P-47D-25 variant, introduced in late 1943, was equipped with a robust payload capacity, able to carry to 1,000-pound bombs and high-velocity aircraft, rockets. These bombs and rockets, combined with the Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber machine guns, allowed the aircraft to deliver a devastating punch to both tactical and strategic targets. It wasn't just a fighter anymore, it was a flying artillery unit that could neutralize enemy positions, supply lines, and infrastructure with terrifying accuracy. On June 6, 1944, the D-Day invasion marked the beginning of a new phase in the war, one that saw the full application of the P-47's ground attack capabilities. The Allied forces had established a beachhead in Normandy, and now it was time to break through German defenses. The P-47 was called upon to support the ground troops by targeting everything from enemy tanks to supply trucks, railroad tracks, and airfields. The aircraft's firepower and heavy bomb load made it an ideal weapon for attacking German armor and supply lines, crucial to the Allies' advance. In just the first month of the Normandy campaign, the P-47s of the 9th Air Force delivered impressive results. During June 1944, P-47s destroyed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, and 512 tanks or armored vehicles. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a fighter, it was an instrument of destruction. turning the skies over occupied Europe into a deadly battlefield. Its bombs and rockets shattered the ability of the German war machine to operate effectively, crippling transportation and logistics, which were vital to the Wehrmacht's defense against the Allied advance. The P-47's effectiveness in-ground attack was particularly evident in the Falaise pocket during the summer of 19. German forces attempted to retreat from the encirclement in Normandy. The Thunderbolts relentlessly attacked, picking off stragglers and destroying any remaining tanks or artillery that could have been used to counter the Allied advance. The precision with which the P-47 struck at these targets not only disrupted the German retreat but also contributed to the overall collapse of the German front in the west. The P-47's contribution to the ground war was not just about its firepower, it was also about its survivability. The Thunderbolt could withstand hits from small arms fire and flak, allowing it to operate closer to the front lines than many other aircraft. American pilots, confident in their aircraft's ability to take punishment and still return home, would often attack targets at low altitudes, braving intense anti-aircraft fire to destroy key enemy assets. The Thunderbolt's tough construction, combined with its heavy armament, made it a terrifying presence on both sides of the battlefield. By late 1944, the P-47 had proven itself in both air superiority and ground attack. It was no longer just a long-range escort fighter, it had become a vital tool for the Allied forces as they pressed toward the heart of Nazi Germany. The massive industrial capacity of the United States, coupled with the ingenuity of its aircraft designers, had ensured that the P-47 Thunderbolt could perform a variety of roles with deadly effectiveness. Whether protecting bombers high in the sky or smashing German tanks on the ground, the P-47 had proven to be an indispensable weapon in the arsenal of the Allies. As the war in Europe moved toward its final stages, the P-47 Thunderbolt stood as a symbol of American industrial power and military innovation. What had started as a joke among German pilots had grown into one of the most formidable fighters in the skies, with a legacy of destruction that stretched from the industrial complexes of Germany to the battlefields of France. Its transformation from a heavy bomber escort to a multi-role fighter bomber underscored its incredible versatility and the adaptability of the men who flew it. By the final years of World War II, the Germans had unleashed a new weapon that threatened to change the course of aerial combat, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, faster and more powerful than anything the Allies had encountered before. The Me-262 represented the cutting edge of Nazi aviation technology, with its sleek design, twin engines, and speed that far exceeded the capabilities of piston-engine fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Me-262 seemed to embody the future of warfare. However, the P-47 Thunderbolt, though unable to match the Me-262 in sheer speed, still had its own advantages. The Me-262 had its weaknesses, particularly during takeoff and landing, when its high-speed engines were not yet at optimal performance. These vulnerable moments provided an opening for the P-47, whose boom and zoom tactics, combined with its devastating firepower, allowed it to exploit the jet's limitations. The P-47's primary advantage was not its speed, but its unmatched firepower. Armed with 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, the Thunderbolt could unleash a veritable storm of bullets at its targets. Against a conventional piston-engine fighter, this firepower was often enough to destroy an aircraft in seconds. Against a jet, it was no less devastating. As long as the P-47 could catch the Me-262 at the right moment, the Me-262's greatest advantage was its speed. Its top speed of over 540 miles per hour made it nearly impossible to catch once it reached cruising altitude. But when the jet was still on the runway, accelerating for takeoff, or when it was coming in for a landing, it was vulnerable. The P-47 pilots, familiar with the boom and zoom technique, would often dive from high altitude to intercept the jet during these critical phases of flight. With its heavy armament and solid construction, the P-47 could deliver a deadly stream of .50 caliber rounds that could penetrate the Me-262's less armored sections, often disabling the aircraft before it could achieve its maximum speed. The .50 caliber machine guns, capable of firing at a rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, were especially effective in these situations. When the P-47 attacked, the incoming barrage of bullets could puncture the Me-262's engines or fuel tanks, leading to catastrophic failures that could render the jet inoperable before it could fully accelerate into combat. Though the P-47 was slower, it was still a terrifying presence when it struck, particularly when attacking Me-262s during takeoff or landing, times when the jet was at its most vulnerable. On November 23, 1944, the first P-47 encounter with the Me-262 took place during an escort mission over Munich. As the P-47s provided cover for American bombers, they observed a flight of Me-262s approaching. Though the jet fighters were faster, the P-47 pilots, aware of their aircraft's limitations, made their move when the Me-262s were still low and slow. preparing for takeoff. The P-47 pilots dove down, delivering a devastating barrage of fire. A few minutes later, a Mi-262 was seen to erupt in flames as it struggled to take off. Despite the overwhelming advantages of the Mi-262, P-47 pilots continued to find success in these engagements. While they could not engage in prolonged high-speed chases with the jets, their ability to strike decisively when the Mi-262 was in a vulnerable position made them a persistent threat. The boom and zoom tactic, which worked so effectively against piston-engine fighters, was adapted for these encounters, allowing the P-47 pilots to deliver surprise attacks on the jets before they could gain full advantage of their speed. The psychological impact on German pilots facing the P-47 was profound. By this point in the war, the Luftwaffe was already stretched thin. The introduction of the Mi-262 had been seen as a potential game-changer, a way to regain air superiority. However, as Allied pilots became more adept at exploiting the Mi-262's weaknesses, the once feared jet became another tool in the arsenal of the P-47 pilots. The sight of the Thunderbolt diving in from above, with its rumbling engine and the unmistakable roar of its .50 caliber guns, became an increasingly common, and the Mi-262, which had been intended to outclass Allied aircraft, now found itself constantly under threat, with P-47 pilots unrelenting in their pursuit. German pilots, who had once laughed at the P-47 and dismissed it as a slow, cumbersome machine, began to fear it. The measured precision of the P-47's attacks and the devastating accuracy of its gunfire became an ever-present threat in the skies. The .50 caliber fire, capable of shredding the Mi-262's engines or fuel lines, had the psychological effect of making the German pilots constantly second-guess their approach to combat. They knew that at any moment, the P-47 could appear, fast and heavy with its guns blazing, ready to neutralize the jet before it even got the chance to accelerate to its full potential. The ability to challenge the Mi-262 on its own terms by exploiting its vulnerabilities during takeoff and landing became a powerful tool for the Allies in the final stages of the war. It wasn't the P-47's top speed that made it a threat to the jets. It was its tactics and brutal firepower that made the difference. The psychological toll on the Luftwaffe was significant, as the German pilots were forced to confront not only a faster enemy but also a more determined one. They could not afford to let their guard down for even a moment, knowing that the P-47 could be lurking just around the corner. As the war drew to a close in the P-47 Thunderbolt's effectiveness against the Mi-262 symbolized the strength of American innovation and perseverance. The P-47 had started the war as a subject of derision and ridicule, but had ended it as one of the most feared and respected aircraft in the sky. Even in the face of the most advanced technology Germany could muster, the P-47 proved that raw firepower, tactical ingenuity, and the will to fight could overcome even the most formidable enemies. That as the war in Europe raged on, one of the most critical factors in the success of the Allied air forces was the sheer industrial power of the United States. The P-47 Thunderbolt, which had once been underestimated and ridiculed by its enemies, became a symbol of American industrial might. The ability of the United States to produce vast quantities of aircraft, combined with the unparalleled training of its pilots, created a winning combination that the Axis powers could not counter. Mass production and industrial power. Scale of Republic Aviation's production efforts for the P-47 Thunderbolt was nothing short of extraordinary. By the end of World War II, 15,683 P-47s had been built, making it the most produced American fighter of the war. This number far surpassed the production totals of any other American fighter, including the famous P-51 Mustang. In fact, more Thunderbolts were produced than F-4U Corsairs, F-6F Hellcats, or any other American aircraft, cementing the P-47's role as the backbone of the U.S. Army Air Forces, USAAF. During the European theater of operations, this remarkable production output was a direct result of the United States' ability to harness its vast industrial base. The American war economy was a juggernaut that could churn out not just planes, but tanks, ships, and munitions at a scale that the Axis powers could not hope to match. Republic Aviation, along with the dozens of other manufacturers involved in the war effort, worked around the clock to ensure that the Allies had the air superiority they needed to win the war. The P-47 was not just a testament to American engineering, it was also a demonstration of efficient mass production. At its peak, Republic Aviation produced hundreds of P-47s every month. This output was not without its challenges, but American factories, employing an enormous workforce that included thousands of women, were able to rapidly adapt and streamline the production process. For example, the introduction of prefabricated assemblies allowed for faster assembly times, while innovations like the B-29 Superfortress-style assembly lines helped reduce the amount of time it took to build each aircraft. The result was a steady supply of aircraft, which allowed the Allies to maintain a continuous offensive against the Axis powers. The P-47, with its rugged design and relatively easy maintenance, was ideal for such mass production. It could be repaired quickly in the field, and even with significant battle damage, it was often able to return to combat. This made the Thunderbolt an invaluable asset in sustaining air superiority over Europe. Superior pilot training, a key to the scale of industrial production, was a crucial factor in the success of the Allies. It was the training of American pilots that ensured these machines were used effectively. The United States placed a significant emphasis on pilot training, understanding that superior training was essential for leveraging the advantages of its aircraft. American fighter pilots underwent rigorous training programs that were far more demanding than those of their German counterparts. One of the key distinctions was the number of hours spent in the cockpit. The minimum standard for an American fighter pilot was 400 flight hours, a figure that far exceeded the roughly 100 hours of flight training that many German pilots had by the time they entered combat. This was not just a matter of quantity, it was a reflection of the quality of training. The U.S. Army Air Force's USAAF ensured that their pilots were well prepared for the realities of aerial combat by emphasizing a variety of training exercises, including dogfights, bombing runs, and formation flying. Pilots were not only taught how to fly, but also how to handle combat scenarios with quick decision-making and precision. This extensive training gave American pilots a significant advantage over their German counterparts, many of whom were still in the process of being trained in the heat of battle. Additionally, the leadership and organizational structure of the USAAF played a critical role in maximizing the effectiveness of these trained pilots. The development of squadrons and fighter groups, led by experienced commanders like Colonel Hubert Zemp and Lieutenant Colonel Robert S. Johnson, ensured that pilots were placed in positions where they could develop their skills and gain valuable combat experience. These leaders instilled a sense of discipline and teamwork, ensuring that the pilots knew not only how to fight but also how to support one another in combat. The American advantage, logistics, resources, and morale, a combination of superior training and the constant supply of aircraft, gave the United States an unparalleled advantage. By 1944, the Allies had established a massive logistical network that ensured American and British forces could strike at German targets with relentless precision. The P-47 Thunderbolt was at the forefront of this logistical push, with its ability to perform multiple roles: escort fighter, fighter bomber, and ground attack aircraft, allowing it to adapt to any situation. But it wasn't just about the quantity of resources, it was also about the quality of those resources. The United States had the advantage of an industrial base that could not only produce vast numbers of planes, but also provide the necessary fuel, munitions, and parts to keep these planes flying in the heat of battle. In contrast, the German war machine, already stretched thin and bombed relentlessly by Allied forces, found it increasingly difficult to maintain the same level of production and supply. German aircraft, including the advanced ME, were often plagued by mechanical failures due to inadequate resources, while the P-47's rugged design ensured it could withstand the rigors of combat. The American morale was also a significant factor. The P-47, as part of the overall air campaign, was a symbol of both American resilience and the power of democracy. It was not just a weapon of war, it was a symbol of a nation's industrial capacity and its ability to adapt and overcome any obstacle. American pilots, confident in their aircraft and their training, entered combat with a sense of purpose and belief that their victory was inevitable. This psychological edge, combined with overwhelming industrial might, ensured that the P-47 would remain a central component of the Allied victory. Conclusion: the Thunderbolt and the American way. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not just a product of American ingenuity in terms of aircraft design. It was also a reflection of the American industrial power and superior training that ensured its effectiveness in battle. The combination of relentless mass production and rigorous pilot training created a sustained advantage in both the air and on the ground that the Axis powers could not match. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once dismissed as a slow and unwieldy aircraft, proved to be a testament to the strength of American industry and the unwavering commitment of its pilots. As the war in Europe came to a close, the legacy of the P-47 was clear. It had played a critical role in securing air superiority for the Allies and had become a symbol of the sheer power and resourcefulness of the United States. The Thunderbolt was a machine forged in the heart of American industry, and its success on the battlefield was a direct result of the indomitable spirit and endless resources the United States brought to bear in the fight against tyranny. By the time the P-47 Thunderbolt was fully integrated into the Allied air campaign over Europe, it had undergone a profound transformation in terms of tactics and operational use. Initially dismissed by many as a slow, cumbersome fighter, the P-47 had proven its mettle in the skies. thanks to both the adaptability of its pilots and the aircraft's unmatched firepower and durability. In this chapter, we'll explore the evolution of P-47 tactics, how its inherent advantages shaped combat strategy, and how real combat missions proved the aircraft's formidable capabilities. The evolution of tactics. From initial failure to mastery at the outset of its deployment in the P-47 Thunderbolt struggled in combat, particularly in terms of maneuverability. In early dogfights, the P-47's large size and relatively slow turning radius were considered weaknesses when compared to the more agile Messerschmitt Bf-109 or the Focke-Wulf FW-190. Its inability to outturn or quickly climb in tight engagements made it difficult to hold its own against the more nimble Luftwaffe fighters. These limitations were especially apparent in one-on-one combat, where pilots found themselves at a disadvantage when trying to engage enemy aircraft at close quarters. However, this perceived weakness would soon become a key to the P-47's transformation in the field. Tactics began to evolve as pilots learned to exploit the Thunderbolt's strengths, particularly its raw power and exceptional survivability, while mitigating its weaknesses. The first breakthrough came with the discovery of the boom and zoom tactic, a maneuver that would go on to define the P-47's success. Boom and zoom. The tactic of choice. The essence of the boom and zoom tactic was simple. Dive at high speed, engage the enemy with devastating firepower, then zoom back up into a climb before the enemy could react. The P-47, despite its lack of agility, was capable of incredibly high-speed dives due to its powerful engine and robust design. From altitudes of 25,000 to 30,000 feet, pilots could dive at speeds of over 500 miles per hour, easily outrunning enemy aircraft. After firing its 8.50 caliber machine guns, capable of unleashing a massive volume of fire, the P-47 would climb back to a higher altitude, safe from enemy retaliation, by avoiding the tight turning fights that would put the P-47 at a disadvantage. Pilots were able to leverage the aircraft's incredible speed and firepower to inflict damage, then disengage before the enemy could counterattack. This tactic was particularly effective against the Luftwaffe's fighters, who often found themselves outclassed in speed and firepower. In a dive attack by the P-47, the unexpected advantage, durability, and risk-taking of the defining traits of the P-47 was its remarkable durability. While many aircraft would have been rendered unflyable after taking hits from enemy fire, the P-47 could sustain extraordinary levels of damage and still return to base. This durability allowed pilots to take greater risks than they might otherwise have in a more fragile aircraft. The Thunderbolt's toughness made it a favorite for missions that involved high levels of danger, such as escort missions or ground attacks. Pilots knew that even if they were hit by enemy fire, their P-47 was likely to stay airborne long enough to complete the mission and make it back to friendly lines. This created a psychological advantage, both for the pilots themselves and for the enemy. German pilots had learned to fear the P-47 not just for its firepower, but for its ability to endure punishment and still maintain its combat effectiveness. One famous example of the P-47's toughness was the mission flown by Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson on June 26, 1943. Johnson's aircraft was hit by over 200 rounds of enemy fire, including several 20mm cannon hits that caused extensive damage. Despite being heavily wounded and losing much of his aircraft's structure, Johnson managed to fly his damaged P-47 back to England, an incredible testament to the aircraft's resilience. Stories like this fueled the confidence of American pilots and cemented the P-47's reputation as a fighter that could take extreme punishment and still get the job done. Real combat missions. P-47 in action. The versatility of the P-47 became most apparent during real combat missions over Europe, where it was used for fighter escort, ground attack, and interception. One of the most successful tactics employed by P-47 pilots was the escort of heavy bombers, particularly the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liber. These bombers were often the primary target of German interceptors, and P-47 pilots were tasked with protecting them on long-range bombing raids into German-held territory. On August 17, 1943, during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, the P-47s provided escort protection for the B-17 bombers as they launched a devastating raid against German industrial targets. As the bombers entered German airspace, they came under intense attack from Luftwaffe fighters, including Bf-109s and FW-190s. The P-47 pilots, utilizing their boom and zoom tactics, dove down from high altitude to engage the German fighters. In the ensuing dogfight, P-47s successfully protected the bombers, shooting down several enemy aircraft while taking minimal losses themselves. Another key mission for the P-47 was the ground attack role, where the Thunderbolt excelled in destroying enemy supply lines, destroying locomotives, and neutralizing armor. In June 1944, after the D-Day landings, P-47s were heavily involved in interdicting German troop movements and attacking supply lines in Normandy. In one mission, a group of P-47s attacked a German convoy in the heart of France, destroying hundreds of trucks, several tanks, and numerous artillery pieces. The P-47's heavy firepower, including its 8.50 caliber machine guns and the ability to carry up to 2,500 pounds of bombs and rockets, made it the perfect aircraft for surgical strikes against ground targets. A P-47 pilot could dive down, deliver a devastating strike, and then zoom back up to a safe altitude before enemy defenses could react. Killing the Luftwaffe, the pilot's perspective for American pilots, the P-47 became a symbol of air superiority. The aircraft's power, versatility, and exceptional durability allowed pilots to take the fight to the enemy with confidence. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe had lost much of its earlier edge, and American pilots, equipped with P-47 Thunderbolts, had become more skilled in both offensive and defensive tactics. The mission logs from July 1944 through early 1945 show an impressive tally of enemy kills. And more importantly, they demonstrate the continued adaptation of P-47 pilots to changing battlefield conditions, whether escorting bombers, attacking ground targets, or taking on enemy fighters. The P-47 proved that tactical adaptation was a key element of success in modern air warfare. The evolution of the P-47 Thunderbolt during World War II was not only a tale of tactical innovation and raw firepower, but also a profound transformation in the enemy's perception of the aircraft. What began as ridicule and underestimation gradually shifted to fear and respect, ultimately culminating in official acknowledgement from the very pilots who once mocked it. This chapter explores how the P-47 went from being seen as a flying milk bottle to being regarded as one of the most formidable weapons in the Allied arsenal. The transformation of the German mindset. When the P-47 first appeared over Europe in 1943, it was met with laughter and derision from Luftwaffe pilots. Its large size and bulky appearance made it an easy target for mockery. Oberleutnant Rolf Hermeken of Jagdgeschwader 26, who initially dismissed the P-47 as a clumsy flying milk bottle, was not alone in this sentiment. Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190 pilots used two more agile, sleek fighters. Couldn't imagine that such a large aircraft could pose any significant threat in aerial combat. The P-47's lack of agility in a dogfight led many German pilots to believe that it was just another American blunder in aircraft design. However, as the war progressed, these initial underestimations began to change. In the early stages of combat, P-47s were primarily employed in the fighter escort role for heavy bombers, often staying at high altitudes and engaging German fighters in boom and zoom attacks. At first, the P-47 struggled to prove itself in dogfighting scenarios against more nimble German aircraft. But as tactics evolved and the aircraft's true strengths were realized, firepower and durability, the situation began to shift. What was initially seen as a cumbersome aircraft was soon recognized as a deadly adversary that could sustain incredible damage and still bring its pilots home. Oberstleutnant Joseph Priller, a veteran's acknowledged transformation in the German perception of the P-47 was perhaps best summed up by one of the Luftwaffe's most respected pilots. Priller, a veteran of the Battle of Britain and an experienced combat leader, had been one of the first to laugh at the P-47 when it arrived on the scene. However, as the war continued, his attitude would undergo a dramatic change. By 1945, Priller's perspective had shifted from mockery to respect. In an official statement, he acknowledged that the P-47 Thunderbolt was, in his view, the best fighter bomber ever made. His recognition was not a mere compliment, but rather a grudging admission that the P-47's combination of firepower, endurance, and sheer toughness made it an overwhelming threat in the skies. This was not just the opinion of a single pilot, it was a sentiment shared by many of his peers, who began to realize that the P-47 was not only survivable in combat, but also extremely effective at both long-range escorts and ground attacks. Priller's transformation was not unique. Many other veteran Luftwaffe pilots who had once considered the P-47 a joke soon found themselves on the defensive when facing the mighty Thunderbolt. The incredible firepower of the P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns, combined with its survivability even after taking hits from enemy fire, turned it into an aircraft that couldn't be easily dismissed. The psychological impact on German pilots. P-47's fearsome reputation on the battlefield created a psychological barrier for German pilots. As the war progressed, each encounter with the Thunderbolt became a source of anxiety, not just because of its combat prowess, but because of its relentless ability to keep coming back, even after absorbing heavy fire. Where the Bf-109 or FW-190 might be easily crippled by a single shot to a vital area, the P-47 could take a staggering amount of punishment and still return to base, often with multiple holes from machine gun and cannon fire. The fear was not limited to frontline encounters. Even during high-altitude bomber escorts, the presence of P-47s could alter the dynamics of an entire battle. German pilots began to adjust their tactics, often avoiding direct confrontation with Thunderbolts unless absolutely necessary. When they did engage, they had to be extremely cautious, knowing that the P-47's heavy firepower and incredible speed meant they were facing a force to be reckoned with. This psychological toll was particularly evident in the way German pilots began to change their defensive strategies. Hit-and-run tactics became more common, with German pilots preferring to strike and then disengage quickly rather than risk prolonged engagements with P-47s. This shift was a direct result of the P-47's relentless attacking power and its ability to inflict massive damage in a short period. In essence, the P-47 began to force German pilots to alter their combat style, diminishing their ability to act offensively and leaving them on the defensive. The shift in combat. From reluctance to fear. As the Allies gained air superiority in 1944, the psychological toll on the Luftwaffe grew, while the P-51 Mustang had taken over long-range bomber escort duties. The P-47's presence continued to dominate the battlefield, especially in fighter-bomber missions. German pilots, who had once dismissed the P-47 as a slow and clumsy target, now found themselves encountering an aircraft that could easily outperform them in many combat situations. In many ways, the P-47 Thunderbolt's greatest victory was not just in its impressive kill-to-loss ratio, or its combat effectiveness. It was in the psychological warfare it waged against the Luftwaffe. Each sortie of P-47s over German-occupied territories meant that the Luftwaffe had to adjust its tactics and, not always successfully. The Thunderbolt's indestructibility in battle, combined with the ever-present threat of its massive firepower, ensured that German pilots were constantly forced to rethink their approach. The lasting legacy, from mockery to terror by the end of the war. The P-47 Thunderbolt had earned its place in history, not just as a symbol of American industrial might and technological prowess, but also as a psychological weapon that broke the will of the enemy. The Luftwaffe's change in attitude from dismissing the aircraft to fearing it was a testament to the power of tactical evolution and air superiority. The P-47's legacy, however, did not end with the fall of Nazi Germany. As the war wound down, the P-47 had already proven itself as an indispensable asset to Allied forces. It had shattered the Luftwaffe's confidence and become the embodiment of American resilience and firepower. What began as a source of ridicule turned into a terror that haunted the skies until the war's end. And even today, the P-47 Thunderbolt stands as a reminder of the indomitable spirit of those who flew it and the fear it instilled in those who faced it. The P-47 Thunderbolt emerged as one of the most successful and influential aircraft of World War II, not only due to its combat capabilities but also its impact on the larger strategic picture of the conflict. The P-47's contributions in both air-to-air combat and ground attack missions proved crucial in shifting the balance of power on both the European and Pacific fronts. This chapter delves into the kill ratios, destruction statistics, and the strategic influence the P-47 had on the war effort. Air-to-air combat, a kill ratio of 4.621. One of the most impressive aspects of the P-47 Thunderbolt was its performance in aerial combat, particularly in its kill-to-loss ratio. Over the course of its service, the P-47 achieved an impressive kill-to-loss ratio of 4.6:1, meaning for every P-47 lost, 4.6 enemy aircraft were destroyed. This ratio was a testament to both the superiority of its design and the tactics employed by its pilots. The P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns, its rugged design, and its ability to absorb considerable damage while still flying were key elements in its success. In aerial combat, the Thunderbolt's ability to dive at high speeds and unleash a devastating volley of machine gun fire made it a formidable adversary in both dogfights and escort missions. Despite being initially underestimated by German pilots, the P-47 quickly proved its worth in combat. As Allied forces transitioned to more coordinated tactics, the P-47's ability to cover large areas of sky and provide escort for heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress helped maintain air superiority over Europe. The P-47 also played a pivotal role in the destruction of German fighter forces, contributing to the eventual decline of the Luftwaffe's ability to mount effective resistance to Allied air operations. The 4.6:1 kill ratio was not just a numerical achievement, it represented a shift in the balance of power in the skies over Europe. The P-47's combination of speed, firepower, and endurance allowed it to dominate in ways that smaller, more agile aircraft like the Bf-109 or FW-190 could not. Ground attack, destruction of enemy infrastructure. While the P-47 Thunderbolt was renowned for its air-to-air capabilities, it also proved itself as a formidable ground attack aircraft. The P-47 was equipped to carry bombs, rockets, and a range of external armaments, allowing it to take on enemy vehicles, railways, and installations with devastating efficiency. This multi-role capability proved particularly valuable during the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, and the subsequent push through Europe. One of the most notable statistics surrounding the P-47 was the immense destruction it caused on the ground. During the war, P-47s destroyed thousands of enemy vehicles, locomotives, and tank installations. Some of the most impressive statistics include 651 locomotives destroyed in a single month, June 1944. 3,847 enemy trucks and vehicles were taken out during the same period. In total, 512 tanks and armored vehicles were either destroyed or severely damaged. These figures highlighted the Thunderbolt's capacity to inflict significant damage on Germany's logistical capabilities, which was critical in disrupting supply lines and crippling the Wehrmacht's ability to sustain its fighting force. The P-47 was particularly effective against targets that were difficult for bombers to hit with precision, such as railway tracks, supply depots, and fuel storage facilities. With the Thunderbolt's ability to carry up to 2,500 pounds of bombs and high-velocity aircraft rockets, it could inflict tremendous damage on these targets, making it an invaluable asset during the Allied advance across Europe. This relentless pressure on the German war machine significantly disrupted their ability to move troops and supplies, helping to weaken their overall war effort. The P-47's precision and ground attack missions demonstrated that the aircraft was not just a fighter escort but also a powerful tool for strategic disruption. The Pacific Theater, a crucial contributor. While the P-47 Thunderbolt is often most closely associated with the European theater, it also played an essential role in the Pacific. The aircraft was used extensively against Japanese targets, contributing to the overall success of the Allied air campaign in the region. In the Pacific, the P-47 was primarily employed in escort missions and ground attack roles. Its long-range capabilities made it well-suited for the long distances involved in the Pacific theater, where it could escort B-17s and B-24s on bombing runs over Japanese-occupied territories. As in Europe, its firepower and durability were its greatest assets in taking on Japanese fighters and interceptors. Additionally, its ability to carry bombs and rockets was used to strike Japanese ground positions and fortifications in both the Philippines and Iwo Jima. The strategic impact, continuous pressure. The P-47 Thunderbolt's legacy went far beyond individual dogfights or bombing raids. Its versatility and reliability allowed the Allied forces to maintain continuous pressure on the Axis powers, both in the air and on the ground. The ability of P-47s to escort bombers deep into enemy territory, coupled with their ground attack capabilities, helped ensure that Axis forces were constantly under attack, whether from the sky or from the ground. In Europe, the relentless attacks on supply lines, railroads, factories, and military infrastructure took a heavy toll on the German war effort, particularly in the latter stages of the war, when resources were stretched thin. The P-47's contribution to the Allied victory cannot be overstated. The sheer number of missions flown and the amount of destruction inflicted in such a short amount of time had a profound impact on the outcome of the war. The P-47 had a role in helping to achieve air superiority in Europe, while simultaneously disrupting the German military's ability to wage war effectively. The combination of the P-47's heavy firepower, its ability to endure heavy damage, and its widespread production meant that it could sustain a continuous onslaught of pressure on the enemy, which ultimately contributed to the Axis powers' inability to recover. The unmatched production and legacy. The mass production of the P-47 also played a role in its impact on the war. Over 15,000 units were produced by Republic Aviation, making it one of the most produced American aircraft of World War II. This allowed the Allied forces to deploy P-47s in large numbers, ensuring that no matter how many were lost, there were always more to take their place. The combination of industrial might, tactical superiority, and unrelenting pressure meant that the P-47 Thunderbolt was always at the forefront of the battle, whether it was in the skies over Germany, the mountains of Italy, or the jungles of the Pacific. In conclusion, the P-47 Thunderbolt was not only a symbol of American industrial might and air superiority, but also a force that fundamentally shaped the outcome of World War II. Its kill-to-loss ratio, ground attack capabilities, and strategic influence had a lasting effect on both the European and Pacific theaters, contributing decisively to the ultimate defeat of the Axis powers. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains one of the most influential aircraft in military history, its legacy enduring as a testament to the power of firepower, resilience, and strategic pressure in achieving victory. The P-47 Thunderbolt's story is one of dramatic transformation, both in the skies and in the minds of those who witnessed its power. From its initial debut in April 1943, when German pilots laughed at its bulky frame and dubbed it the flying milk bottle, to its final role as one of the most feared and respected aircraft of World War II. The Thunderbolt's legacy is a testament to innovation, resilience, and the strategic advantage of industrial power. This chapter explores the enduring impact of the P-47, its role in reshaping aerial combat, and its continued influence on aviation history. From ridicule to reverence. When the P-47 first appeared over occupied France, it seemed, at first glance, to defy the conventional wisdom of fighter design. Compared to the sleek, agile Messerschmitt Bf-109 or the nimble Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Thunderbolt appeared awkward and oversized. German pilots like Oberleutnant Rolf Hermikon openly mocked the aircraft, confident that its lack of maneuverability would make it an easy target. Yet, as Allied pilots adapted to the P-47's unique strengths, the aircraft's true capabilities began to emerge. Its sturdy construction, powerful Pratt & Whitney R280 double wasp engine, and 8.50 caliber machine guns transformed it from a seemingly cumbersome plane into a lethal predator of the skies. The Thunderbolt could withstand hits that would destroy other fighters, dive faster than many enemy aircraft, and deliver devastating firepower in short bursts. Over time, the laughter of German pilots was replaced by fear and respect. By 1945, veterans like Oberst Joseph Preiler acknowledged the Thunderbolt as the finest fighter bomber ever built. A dramatic reversal from their earlier derision. The Thunderbolt's journey from ridicule to reverence illustrates a key lesson about innovation and perception. Sometimes, strengths are not immediately obvious, and initial impressions can be misleading. In the case of the P-47, its apparent clumsiness masked an extraordinary combination of firepower, durability, and versatility, qualities that would prove decisive in the air war over Europe and the Pacific. Design philosophy proven in combat. The heart of the P-47's success was a design philosophy that emphasized power over agility, resilience over finesse, and firepower over subtlety. Alexander Kartveli and the team at Republic Aviation took a bold approach, creating an aircraft that could absorb damage, outgun opponents, and carry out a variety of missions without compromising performance. This philosophy was validated repeatedly in combat. In the early days, Allied pilots discovered that turning engagements against nimble German fighters often led to disadvantages. However, adopting boom-on-zoom tactics, diving at high speed, unleashing concentrated fire, and climbing back to altitude played to the Thunderbolt's strengths. Its ability to sustain heavy hits allowed pilots to take risks other aircraft could not, ensuring that missions could be completed even under intense enemy fire. Furthermore, the Thunderbolt's industrial scalability amplified its effectiveness. With over 15,000 units produced, the P-47 could maintain relentless pressure on German forces, making it impossible for the Luftwaffe to neutralize the threat entirely. This combination of innovative design, combat resilience, and production capacity exemplified the strategic thinking that defined Allied success. Victory in war is not just about individual skill or aircraft performance, it's about leveraging technology, logistics, and numbers together. Impact on the war and beyond. The P-47 Thunderbolt's influence extended far beyond individual dogfights. In Europe, it protected bombers, decimated ground forces, and disrupted logistics. In the Pacific, it escorted long-range bombers and delivered precise strikes against fortified positions. Its versatility as a fighter bomber, and ground attack aircraft made it an invaluable asset in theaters that demanded adaptability. The aircraft's psychological impact was equally significant. By the middle of 1944, German pilots were adjusting tactics simply to avoid encounters with P-47s. Acknowledging the aircraft's lethality, its ability to combine firepower, armor, and speed meant that no mission could be undertaken lightly, and enemy pilots were forced into defensive postures that ultimately reduced the effectiveness of Luftwaffe operations. In essence, the Thunderbolt demonstrated that engineering, tactics, and mass production could work in unison to create a strategic advantage that was greater than the sum of its parts. The lessons learned from its design and deployment continue to influence modern fighter and attack aircraft, where multi-role capabilities and durability remain highly valued. Inspiration and enduring legacy. The Thunderbolt's legacy is not limited to statistics or battle outcomes. It also inspired generations of aviators, engineers, and military strategists. Its story serves as a reminder of the importance of adaptation, courage, and the ability to see potential where others see flaws. The P-47 demonstrated that even an aircraft initially underestimated could change the course of battles and earn enduring respect. Museums around the world display P-47s as icons of aviation history, preserving the memory of pilots who risked their lives in these machines. In literature, documentaries, and personal accounts, the Thunderbolt is celebrated not just for its mechanical might, but also for the human ingenuity and bravery it enabled. Moreover, the Thunderbolt's story is a broader lesson in innovation under pressure. It shows how visionary design, combined with strategic deployment and industrial capacity, can overcome initial skepticism and reshape the battlefield. This principle resonates not only in military history but also in engineering, technology, and organizational strategy across diverse fields today. Conclusion: the P-47 Thunderbolt remains one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II, embodying the transformation from mockery to mastery. From a flying milk bottle to a symbol of Allied dominance, its design philosophy, emphasizing firepower, durability, and production scalability, proved decisive against the Luftwaffe and left a permanent mark on the history of aerial combat. Beyond its tactical and strategic impact, the Thunderbolt stands as a testament to innovation, perseverance, and the enduring power of combining technology with human courage. The legacy of the Thunderbolt endures not only in museums and history books, but also in the lessons it imparts. That vision, resilience, and determination can turn even the most underestimated weapon into a force capable of reshaping the world.